Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Open Ed Week with SUNY Online. We are pleased to have you here with us. I just want to point out that if you need the captioning on, that is individual in Zoom. I have it on for the recording on my end, but you would just click the More button on your Zoom toolbar with the three dots, and you would click on Captions and then Show Captions. So if you have any trouble at all, jump into the chat and I can help you out. I'll be moderating the chat as we go along, and Dan will answer questions for us. So my pleasure today to introduce Dan Barrancotta, who is an educator and instructional designer with experience in workforce development, K-12, and higher education. Dan currently serves as an instructor at Western Governors University in the Education Technology and Instructional Design graduate program, and also an adjunct instructor at SUNY Genesee Community College, Niagara University, and Bryant and Stratton College. Dan's teaching philosophy is centered around transformative leadership and the belief that every learner is unique and brings valuable knowledge and experience with them that can benefit the group. He seeks to develop diverse, equitable, and inclusive learning experiences that foster a classroom community where all learners can learn with and from each other to accomplish their goals and drive change in the workforce. Dan lives in Western New York with his wife Alexa and their two young daughters, Ariana and Gianna. And we're thrilled to have you here today, Dan.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate the introduction and the warm welcome, and I appreciate all of you for being here today. And apologize for the schedule change. Had a little flu bug running through our household this week, so I appreciate folks that maybe had this planned for Tuesday but are here with us today on Thursday. So, and if you're watching the recording, thank you so much as well for being here and engaging with this. And hopefully, we have something here today that will be very practical for each and every one of you, whether it's a big or small change to your workflows and what you're doing for yourself and for your students. I think there's something here that hopefully everybody can take with them to sort of help through their processes and their day-to-day work and ultimately support students, which is really what we're after. So we are going to get in and talk about, really the power of empathy as we use AI and taking AI into our actual practices and how to really leverage prompt engineering and look at this holistically from an instructional design standpoint and leveraging these AI resources, but also maintaining that human element throughout this process to make sure we're doing what we need for our learners. And as Aaron mentioned, I'm come from Western New York. I come from SUNY Genesee Community, Western Governors University. I just like to always share a picture of my girls there. Gianna's going to be 1 on Friday, and Ariana turned 4 about 3 weeks ago. So I always like to just kind of brag on them whenever I get the chance. And as I mentioned, today we're going to really kind of dive into not just AI and using AI, not just, what our OER and open education and what that's all about, but how can we sort of combine these two, but really use empathy as sort of our key component to link them, to drive them, to focus our designs in everything that we're doing for our students. So we're going to really start with that idea of designing with empathy. We're going to get into how to leverage some prompts and think about our prompting practices to get the good results and get us what we need for our students. And then we'll have a little bit of time to hopefully go through an example, share some practices, share some ideas, have a discussion, open up some time for question and answer at the end. But as I know, all of you are busy and have multiple things to be doing, so I'll be respectful of your time as we go as well. So what we really want to kind of focus in on today, right? We think about artificial intelligence. It's been such a hot topic for the last couple of years, really. But I think we're starting to see a bit of a shift in AI. And originally it was very much, oh no, and what are all these bad things that are going to happen as a result of AI? Students are going to cheat. What are we going to do? And there's a lot of very real and valid concerns. And that's not to say that those concerns are not out there. But I think what we see now is that AI is here. And yes, we know it can do a lot of things. We know generative AI can create student work. We know it can create, things that maybe we were worried about replacing our jobs and our workflows. And that was a major concern originally, and rightfully so. But I think what we're trying to shift into now in an instructional design field and really a better question to focus in on is how do we guide AI to meet real learner needs? How can we leverage AI? How can we use AI not to replace us, but to sort of help us and amplify us. And I'll use the phrase AI as a co-pilot, not an autopilot as we move through today. And that's really the idea I want us to always kind of think about here is to make sure that we're trying to leverage AI in a positive light. It's a tool, it's a resource that we have. Yes, there's some concerns. Yes, there's things we need to be aware of, and we'll touch on some of those briefly today. But the real sort of focal point of this session today, and what I hope all of you can, either are or will be doing soon, is thinking about AI as a way to help you help your learners. And I think if we can get our mind around that and focus in on that, that this is a tool, this is a resource that can support student learning. It can support our workflows, help us be efficient, help us create and provide students with more resources maybe than ever before. Because, we're all just short on time, right? We don't have the time to always create a rubric for every assignment or give the best feedback on things or create extra practice questions or another sort of supplementary resource. But maybe AI can become our design partner and help us with that. So, can we guide AI? Can we leverage AI to do exactly what we want it to do? Not so much just asking AI to do something and leave it be, but really getting into that idea of prompt engineering, which is we've seen, and anybody that's used AI knows how important that is. And really, why is that so important? And why is this idea of empathy so important? And this is, I think, crucial whether we're designing with artificial intelligence in mind or not using AI at all. We're just sitting there with a paper and a pencil. Whenever we're designing, whenever we're thinking about our learners, whenever we're thinking about design, we're thinking about teaching, we're thinking about creating resources, fostering engaging learning environments, developing assessments, providing feedback, whatever it might be, we always want that empathetic approach. I think if we can design with empathy, that puts us in position to be most successful most often and truly reach and engage our learners. And ultimately, that's what it's all about. We're here to support our learners. And I think we owe it to our learners to be empathetic and try to understand their needs, their desires, their wants, and what is going to support their learning. Because certainly we know that our learners have changed over the years. We're not learning the same today as we were, 6 months ago, let alone 6 years ago, let alone 26 years ago. A lot of things have changed, and it's rapidly evolving, and we've got to stay on top of that. And we want to make sure that we're being empathetic to that. And it's really important, as we'll talk about today, in order to be empathetic, we have to know who our learners really are. And there are ways that we can leverage AI to help us with that process, to better understand who our learners are and better understand their expectations and needs. And we want to be aware of that as we work through things like learner analysis and needs analysis as we're creating and designing. We're thinking about this sort of holistically throughout the process. And empathy matters, right? Because it matters in everything that we do, but it matters in education because we really want to provide, access for all of our learners. We want to provide our learners with equitable opportunities to learn. We want to make sure that we're keeping learning affordable for students, that, we're not requiring the purchase of, expensive textbooks or online platforms and resources and things like that. How can we leverage these tools that are out there to put resources in the hands of our students, on the screens of our students, whatever they might need? How could we provide that to them and give them sort of that opportunity to be successful? And really, that's all we should be trying to do in education, is giving our students an opportunity. Ultimately, it's up to them to take advantage of that opportunity, but can we put our students in a position to be successful? Can we provide them with that equitable access? And getting students in the door is not enough. Let's try to do more than just putting them, in a class or in the program. Let's support them through that process, and let's find out who they really are and make sure that we're finding ways to connect ideas for our students. I think that's one of the things that is often overlooked in education and in the way we teach and the way we provide resources and material is really the importance of context for our learners. How can we, sort of explain new ideas using analogies and examples and providing context around these that fit and match with our students' lived realities. Things are different than when we learned it. This a student's experience is different than maybe when we experienced that time as a student. And we've got to find new ways to connect these ideas. Even old ideas can be better connected with new examples, new analogies, and that can be tricky sometimes for us to come up with, right? What's comfortable for us is the way we tend to teach and present material, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to connect or provide that context in the same way that it used to. So, how can we use AI tools and resources to try to shift some of those examples, analogies, build better context, again, to meet the needs of our modern learners, of the students that are in our classes today? And really what we want to do and think about when we're thinking about empathy in terms of instructional design, and I mentioned this is really sort of a all-encompassing type idea as we work through design, is how can we leverage and use empathy to really understand those learners and exactly what their context is and exactly where they're coming to us from, and can we anticipate things that might come up and be difficult? Can we learn from previous students? Can we be prepared for some of those issues that might arise and maybe design for them? Always want to try to design with inclusion in mind, right? The idea of equity by design and making sure that we're fostering inclusive learning environments, really leveraging those principles of universal design for learning are all so important and all sort of a crucial part of designing with empathy here. And ultimately, what we're creating here, what we want to focus in on is this idea of learner experience design and fostering an experience for our students. We're human centered. We're creating this approach, designing this resource, designing this lesson, designing this unit, this course, whatever it might be. We're designing it for our students. It's not just that we're designing it for design's sake. We're not designing it for ourselves. We're not doing it because it's the way we've always done it. But this is all about what that student experience is going to be like as they work their way through this material and this resource that we're putting in front of them. So, how do we use that? How do we do that? We've got to be intentional here, right? It's not just, guessing. It's not just what we think, but can we be very intentional with our analysis? And again, time is always something that's short for us, but this is one of those things that I think is really worthwhile to spend the time there and make sure that you're finding the time to do it, and also leveraging tools within AI to help you with that analysis and help you with that process, because I think we can really, find ways to use AI tools to help provide some information about our students and get some more ideas for what will best sort of fit for their needs. And this is a quote that I really like from George Couros, who's an author that I really like. His primary background is K-12 and in leveraging technology and universal design for learning, but it's super applicable to any type of learning. Highly recommend his works if you're interested in a good read. Um, but this is a quote that always really stood out to me in thinking about this idea of not just empathy, but what our modern learners are really all about and after. And, there's a clear need for innovation in education. Without innovation, organizations cease to exist. And if education leaders refuse to evaluate and stay in touch with students' needs, schools will fail, just like businesses that don't keep up with changing customer needs. And I think that's just sort of a really good way to think about this overall process here. We can all think about, the way businesses have changed over the years from, thinking about, storefronts in your town or neighborhood that have changed and evolved to, the incredible rise of Amazon and what they offer. And it's really about finding what our users want and need. And how can we really leverage, innovation, technology, the things that are available to us to stay on the forefront. And that's what keeps good, businesses growing and in business. And that's also what can help keep us, supporting our students and help keep schools, with enrollment and retention, and help keep instructors and designers helping, continue to create good classes that are supporting their learners and providing students with exactly what they need. It has to be about the learner, but we have to recognize that those learners are changing, their needs are changing, the technologies that's available to them and to us is changing, and their expectations of what we provide them is also changing. Students no longer expect to learn by being handed a textbook and told to read a chapter and take some notes. They don't expect to sit in a classroom and hear a lecture. That's not the way they're engaging with really anything anymore, right? We see, folks, the rates on reading books and newspapers and all of that has declined so much over the years. Folks are on their phones. They're really in this TikTok type generation where it's very quick. Give me what I need to know right when I need to know it, or I'm scrolling on to the next thing. Can you keep my intention, within those first couple seconds? If not, you're going to lose me and I'm on. So we've got to recognize that here as we're designing and putting together our learning resources. So how do we understand who those learners are and what their needs are? We've got to do learner needs analysis. And this is one of those things that from an instructional design standpoint, we can spend a lot of time here. There's a lot of really good, powerful things that can come from doing full and complete learner needs analysis. I recognize that in a day-to-day standpoint, many of you are teaching your own classes while maybe also balancing some other work and responsibilities, and you might not have the time to do full learner needs analysis. But this is where we can leverage AI to help us with this. This is where we can also use AI to provide some context and information on those modern learners, recognizing what those modern learners want and need. It's important that we make sure that we're recognizing these things and that we're aware of what that is. And it's very real that we might not be aware of some of those issues that arise for students or expectations, especially if maybe we haven't been a student ourselves in a while. It's easy to kind of start to lose touch with that. Even when we're consistently teaching folks, if we're not in those learning the learner's seat and looking at things from that standpoint, it can be easy to lose touch with that. So, let's use AI, let's use these ideas of learner needs analysis to help keep that fresh in our mind. So before we just dive into artificial intelligence and start prompting and asking it to do things for us, we can spend a few moments, really trying to analyze who we're designing for and what they need. And it's important that as we talk over these next few minutes, we're going to talk a lot about prompt engineering and the information that we provide the AI tool. And it's important that we recognize, how these AI tools work. And this is not a session to get into large language models and all of that. And I don't want to do that, but we have to recognize, most of us, I think, know or have heard sort of this idea of garbage in, garbage out. We know that AI tools are going to respond to the inputs and the prompts that we give them. So the better information we provide, the more complete that input is, the more direct that input is, the better output we're going to get. And can we provide the context to the artificial intelligence tool, to the generative AI? I mentioned before again, right? AI is our co-pilot, not our autopilot. We're not handing the reins over. We're not asking AI to do the work for us, but can we leverage it sort of as our partner in design? And this all starts with explaining and recognizing who are our learners, what are their struggles, what motivates them, what potential barriers or constraints exist with them. And you very well may know the answers to these questions. And if you do, that's awesome. And you should share that information as you're creating these resources. Now, you're not sharing personally identifiable information, that Jane Doe is a single mother that's struggling, in a low socioeconomic status, or things like that. We're not sharing student details or information, but we want to make sure we're sharing, context about who our learners are. And if you're not sure, you can ask AI, what's a sort of general learner persona for a student that's, was born in 2005 and is attending community college for the first time this year. Provide that story. of who your sort of students are. Give a little bit of that context and find out what those students and those demographics and in that particular generation, what's going to motivate them, what's going to help them, what are things that they often struggle with. So we know that and we can be aware of that at the beginning. So we can design around that rather than trying to go back and sort of fix that or support that after the fact. So as we think about a learner analysis, it's exactly that, right? We're trying to analyze our learners. So we want to think about who are our learners? Who is it that we're designing for? So before we design anything, we want to think about who we're designing it for. It's not about us. It's not even necessarily about the objective. It's about who is the student that's trying to meet that objective. So we really want to make sure that we're aware of where our learners are coming to and from and with us, and making sure we recognize their level of experience and prior knowledge, maybe their previous academic experiences. Are if we're trying to teach students about writing, do they have experience with this type of writing? Are they coming to us in need of some more remedial or supplemental resources, or are they more advanced and they're ready to move on? What's their comfort level and reading level with language and proficiency in grammar and things of that nature? Because the level that we create these resources in is very important. An often overlooked prompt that you can use with AI there is just asking AI to write at a particular reading level, grade level, is important. And generally speaking, for accessibility standpoint, you don't want to create resources or content or assignment instructions or directions that are above a seventh grade reading level. And that's something that is often surprising to many folks that haven't heard that, especially, we're thinking we're teaching in higher education, especially I'm going to write this at a graduate level or an undergraduate level. But no, we really want to keep things at a seventh grade or lower reading level. And it's important when we create these resources and materials, we tell the generative AI tool to do that. And we might want to even keep it simpler than that. But many times, some of these AI tools will use very complex sentences, large words, and that's going to negatively influence students with lower reading levels, students that are multilingual learners, and things of that nature. So, thinking about the proficiency in language is something that we want to be aware of as we're designing. We want to make use of accessibility and what do our students have access to, and make sure we're providing resources and content that will fit what they have available to them, and also do it in a way that's going to be aware of their time constraints, right? How much time is a student going to put in? Again, those previous expectations. It's not that we're lowering expectations, but I think it's very unrealistic to expect students to sit down and read for a couple hours straight for your course each night and things like that. It's just, if we want students to do that, we might think that's what's best for them. That might be what worked for us, but that's not likely to be what the student is going to do in this day and age. Again, it's that quick, give me what I need to know when I need to know it, and let me move on. Keep me engaged, or you're going to lose me and I'm on to the next thing. There's so many other distractions and ways to get information and resources. And I think what we want to avoid is a student getting a textbook from us and us saying, hey, go read this, and them saying, you know what, I don't want to read that. I'm just going to go to AI and I'm going to have it teach me anyways. And then they're going to do that, and that might help them and they might do a good job. But if they don't know all this prompt engineering and the context behind it, maybe they're not getting that good output. So are there ways we can do that process for them to keep them sort of, in the loop with us and where we want them to be? And then ultimately, a needs analysis is always important when we're creating resources as well. Needs analysis, again, are all about what are the needs of our learners and how do we know that? Let's try to always dive into what we're seeing, the feedback that we're getting from students sort of as we go, but also from students from a previous semester, previous course. Can we recognize and use AI to sort of aggregate some of the materials and the resources and the things that are out there about common needs for similar students, and we can leverage these tools to help research and understand that. But can we find out, where maybe particular skills abilities, levels of knowledge are sort of shrinking or not quite up to par in the workforce or in our chosen field? Are there particular areas of concern for, as folks are hiring people in these areas that they're looking for, things that they want? Are we seeing students reporting common misconceptions or issues? Are there problems with student learning where what's causing them to disengage and sort of remove themselves from a learning experience or fall off? How do we re-engage them then? What is it that we can do to, again, just really be empathy driven in what we're doing? We want to find things that fit our students' needs. We want to fill their gaps. We want to make sure we're providing the bridges to help connect their learning. And so as we do this analysis, it's so important that we find out who our students are and we leverage AI to help us. Again, we can have this conversation with AI. We can share information about who our students are broadly and generically, and work with AI to develop these learner and needs analysis before we actually start creating the resources. And then we take these insights, we use AI as our design partner, and then that can help us really work on as we craft those designs, what are those students going to need? So what's that tone going to be? Do we need it to be more clear, concise, and direct? Do we need it to be more nurturing and understanding and developmental? Those are important, distinctions. And we might not even be thinking about the possibility of how AI is going to write these materials, but those are things that we can provide the AI tool direction on how to do that. And again, as I mentioned already, that reading level, what's the reading level going to be? Can we be very direct and ask it to be, at a fifth grade reading level, at a seventh grade reading level? And that's not to say that our learners are at a fifth grade level, but that's just to say that, why are we going to increase the cognitive load, or cause potential issues with engagement or understanding or access? Let's just write at a very clear and concise level. Let's be very direct and explanatory of what we're trying to teach. There's no need to use, again, complex sentences and big words just for the sake of doing it. Think it's always really helpful as well for our learners, and something that many have come to expect in their learning now is examples. And whether that's examples as they learn content or examples as they get ready to produce new assignments and resources, can we share them an example? Something that, what are we looking for? Can we clearly communicate our needs to our students, and our expectations to our students, and that sort of meets their needs? Students love images, right? It's engagement. Think about the way that folks are always connected to their screens, social media, TikTok, Instagram, providing students with context, providing them with engagement through images, I think is really important. Those can be decorative images. They might be images that we use to teach and learn, but I think we're going to want to make sure we're making use of more than just plain text. The structure that we provide student learning, I think the ideas of chunking and scaffolding are two things that I could talk about all day. They're so important. And I think as you design with AI, those are a couple buzzwords that you might want to use within your designs and within your prompts. How can I chunk this information for our students? How can I scaffold towards this particular learning goal? And chunking is really just giving students information in bite-sized pieces, manageable, to handle. Chunking, my soon to be 1 year old just started eating pizza. Cheese pizza is like her new favorite food, but we don't give her the whole pizza at once, right? We try to cut it up, give her to her smaller pieces. She takes little bites from those smaller pieces. Before you know it, she's eaten way more pizza than I thought she could handle, but she's doing it in chunks. And that's the way we want to learn. Let's not give the whole pizza. Let's not give the whole learning all at once. And that's too much to handle. Can we provide that chunking? Can we give it in those bite-sized pieces? It helps with engagement. It helps with learning. It helps with motivation as well. We don't feel overwhelmed and get that anxiety. And then the idea of scaffolding learning is just preparing students for each next thing, right? We're sort of building like we'd build a scaffolding unit up a building or a pyramid. block by block, level by level, starting with the foundation. As we prepare, we can hold more weight, we can do more things. We're more likely to be successful as we continue to move. And we want to think about that idea of how am I scaffolding learning towards achieving these learning goals and objectives, where ultimately my assessments will be. And we're not going to get into assessment design today, but that's another thing that we can use artificial intelligence for as well. As you're creating these resources, keep it going, right? Move into the assessments. How can we create universal design for learning assessments that are, equitable for all of our learners? That's where we want to be. Important, changes that we can make for our students to keep them engaged. So, really using these AI tools, keeping these types of things in process. How can we learn what we need from these, and then remind the AI tool to keep this stuff in mind as we go. And that's the idea again here of AI as a design partner. It's there to help us, to support us, not to replace us. We don't want to go there and ask the AI tool to do it all for us and expect that it's going to get us right. We've got to kind of take ownership. I always like to kind of think of this as if you had a graduate assistant or a new assistant was hired to help you, right? And who wouldn't love to have an assistant come in? You would be giving them tasks, but you would provide them with the context, with the information, a little bit of training before you sent them out to complete that task. And then when they came back, they would share it with you. You would review that task. You probably would have some suggestions and feedback, send them back out to work on it a little more and come back. Same thing with an AI tool. Now we can just do that at the snap of a finger, but that same process is really at play here. Excuse me. And that's again back to that idea of an AI as the co-pilot, not the autopilot. We can use AI to help be that assistant. It can help us draft things. We can suggestions. Can it expand on things we're already doing? Can it take resources that we already have, but maybe reformat it in a more chunked or scaffolded nature, a more engaging process for our learners today? Can we continue to revise those examples, analogies, the way we're writing our materials and resources for our students? But we have to provide that direction, and we have to make sure that things are well aligned with our learning goals and objectives, with our students' needs, and make sure that this is all accurate information and that we're always keeping that idea of equity and inclusion in mind. It's up to us to be responsible for the work that the AI tool does. If we're going to use AI, and I encourage folks to use AI, you're ultimately responsible for it, just like you'd be responsible for the work that assistant did for you before you put it in front of your students. So the problem that we see, right, with generic prompts, and all of you probably know this already or experienced some of this, is weak prompts lead to weak results, right? Garbage in, garbage out. If we're very sort of generic, create a textbook chapter on fractions, you're gonna get that, right? You'll get a textbook chapter on fractions, but that doesn't have near enough context to provide what your students actually need if they're trying to learn about fractions, right? There's no information there on who your students are, what level they're at, what level they need to get to, what your learning goals and objectives are. And you're going to get very sort of rudimentary surface level information that's not really likely to align with what you actually need. So when we're using empathy, when we think about all those topics that we've covered already, and we really start to put that idea of designing with empathy into our prompt engineering, that's where we start to develop these strong prompts. And I've done prompts that are, an initial prompt that might be literally an entire page in Microsoft Word. And it could be more. You want to provide as much information, I think, about what you want in order to get something that's as close to that when it comes out. What the AI tool wants to do is provide you with what you want. If you tell it what you want, that's what it'll do. If you don't tell it exactly what you want, it'll sort of guess and it'll give you something, but it won't be maybe exactly what you want, but how it can't read your mind, right? We've got to give it that information. So, good, strong initial prompting is going to always include a description of your learners. It's going to provide the context of your course materials and what your course is. Is this an introductory level course? Is it a higher level course? Things of that nature. your learning goals, objectives, and outcomes. Those are things that I think are important to put right in there. Sometimes I'll put some information like a course description and learning goals and objectives from my syllabus right into an initial prompt. So it understands this is what we're doing, this is what we're focusing on, this is what we want to make sure we're creating. Asking the AI tool to design with accessibility in mind. Sometimes asking the AI tool to alter things for particular accessibility issues that we might be interested in changing and designing for. All things that we can do and can consider within our prompting. That idea of tone and reading level. How do you want this to come across? Do you want it to be academic? Do you want it to be very, sort of warm and welcoming? Do you want it to be at a high level or a more intermediate level? Where is that level? And what the answer is to those questions, you know best based on your students and doing those learner and needs analysis. And then also formatting expectations. Those are things that you can also be really direct with when it comes to AI tools. Some AI tools want to write long paragraphs and again, complex sentences. They want to bold things. They want to include emojis. Some want to use bullet points. Some are going to be, some models are designed to be sort of short with their answers. Some are going to be very drawn out. So what's your expectation? Something that I use a lot, right? In 100 words or less, or how long do you want this to be? I need in 3 paragraphs. You're being specific about length because you're going to get what you want. I want this in bullets. I want this formatted in a way that I can make 5 accordions in bright space, so that you're designing and crafting this material with that formatting expectation in mind. What is this going to look like for my students? Provide that information within your prompts because when we're prompting, that's sort of the shift that I think we're seeing with the field of instructional design and how this works. These are all things that have gone on for years and decades, really, in instructional designers' minds and through their processes as they work through this. They're thinking about all these things, they're iterating, they're trying new things out, they're making those changes. But now with some prompts, we're able to get a lot of that stuff done right off the bat. So that's what good instructional design is really all about now is crafting these detailed prompts to get exactly what we want out of the AI tool. So just sort of a sample empathetic prompt here, a more complete prompt to get us started. Create an introductory OER reading on academic integrity for first generation community college students who may be unfamiliar with citation expectations. We want to use a supportive tone, plain language, real world examples, include a short self-check reflection activity, and ensure accessibility by using short paragraphs and clear headings. Very direct. This is what I want. This is what I'm going to get. I know that's what it's going to come out with. I'm guiding the AI tool with what my students need. They're first generation community college students. I know that they're unfamiliar with these citation expectations. I know we need to be supportive of them as we work through this so that they don't feel sort of intimidated. We want to use clear, plain language, to make sure that we're not confusing folks as they learn this new thing. Whenever we can use real world context and examples, I think that's important. And the idea of getting students sort of reflecting on their learning, I think, is always a best practice too. So just things that we can, again, put into our prompt. Now the AI tool has a better idea of what to do rather than just saying, hey, create something on using citations in your writing. Now that gets us our initial prompt, but that doesn't mean that we're done there. I think we want to remember that AI, again, is our design partner. It's a partner. It's a two-way street. We ask it to do something, it's going to come back with it. That doesn't need to be the end of it, though. Something that I've started doing that I think is a really powerful way to work with artificial intelligence is as you work through your prompts, it's always this idea of being conversational. So always continuing to ask the AI tool questions and share more information and resources with it to get exactly what you want. But it's okay in that conversation to ask the AI tool what it needs from you. You can phrase things in a way that you write to the AI tool, hey, you're an expert instructional designer working at a 4-year research institution with highly affluent learners. What would you need to know from me about this? Or whatever your context might be. Because sometimes it might be the exact opposite of that, right? It might be first generation community college, low socioeconomic status. Those are two different groups. We want to try to design differently for them so that we're putting things into the context and in a way that's going to help support learning for both. So asking the AI tool what it needs from you to create the best resource is also a very good practice to use. And I think that's something that is very simple, and it might spark some more ideas in your mind, and it might help clarify exactly what those outputs are. Again, the AI tools, is odd as it sounds, they want to sort of please you. They want to answer your questions. They want to provide you with what you need. It's trying to do exactly what you ask it to do. The better you are at asking it to do things, the better it's going to be at doing that thing. And then once we get outputs from our AI tools, we never want to just sort of take it as fact and move on and be done with it. Again, that idea of being conversational is really important. You can always go back for more. You can always ask it to change and update and make adjustments along the way. You're not bound by that first response. But we always want to make sure that we're reviewing that, we're evaluating it. Again, if our assistant brought it to us, we would go through that very carefully. We want to make sure that it's a very realistic type resource and material for our students, that we're aware of any potential biases or cultural insensitivities that might be there. Is it an accessible resource and material here? Is it well aligned to the things that we're doing? Do we recognize any types of hallucinations from the AI tool where it's kind of making things up or misconstruing facts? Those are all important things to review and to look for, because again, that idea of empathetic design continues through this process. It's not done with that initial prompt. We're not just taking that initial output and going with it. We've got to be responsible for our students, anticipating their potential issues and needs, and making sure we're continuing to craft the AI output. And the idea of inclusion, as we've sort of sprinkled in throughout, is so important. And we want to make sure we're continuing to keep that at the forefront of our design process here, being aware of our different learners and providing information and resources to support all of them. So how can we do things, that we've talked about here, right? When we're designing with equity and with inclusion in mind, we're simplifying that language. We're providing multiple representations. Some folks might want to see a picture, some might want to read some text, some might want to listen to a podcast or watch a video. Those are all things that we can create with AI tools now, and free AI tools. Don't hesitate to use those things and provide, again, that idea of universal design for learning, multiple means of representation. Give your students what they need to learn in the way that they want to learn it. And we can continue to try to, again, when we're trying to advance equity, we're trying to give students an opportunity to grow and to learn, to practice, to reflect on, their learning as well. And if we need to do things like translating resources, materials, putting it into different examples, different languages, different reading levels, we can do all of those things using AI tools as design partners. I mentioned a couple times the idea of universal design for learning, always such an important thing. Again, we could spend a week on UDL and the importance of it. I can't recommend diving into UDL enough if you haven't already, or if you're a little familiar with it. Just really, your time is always going to be well spent trying to really understand what UDL is all about. And it's important within the prompting, and you can always in your prompt include things like make use of universal design for learning best practices or principles within your outputs. We're again reminding the AI tool to be aware that no two learners are exactly the same, and we want to provide resources, material, and information to our learners to help them support and learn in the ways that they want to learn. And of course, we always want to be aware of, potential risks and ethical concerns. These are all very real. Whenever we use the AI tools, we have to be responsible for this. So again, you have to review that output, be aware of those potential hallucinations, or when the AI tool starts to sort of make things up. Again, it wants to please us, and sometimes when it doesn't know or it's not sure, It just kind of pretends, and it will answer. It will provide you with something. It very rarely comes back and just says, "I don't know," or "I'm not sure what you mean by that." It's going to just give you something, and we have to be sure what it gives you is right. So again, good prompting helps limit some of those hallucinations. I also think a lot of these generative AI tools have improved dramatically, even in the last year or two, with the decreasing those hallucinations and those types of issues as well. But the idea of bias is still very relevant within the information that trains these large language models. So be aware of those things that can pop up. Again, something that seems to have improved dramatically over the last year or two, but still something we want to review and be aware of. Over reliance, right? Make sure that we're not over relying on the AI tool to do your work. You have to put the work in, you have to provide that context, that information at the beginning, and make sure that you're recognizing exactly what you're after. Being aware of copyright issues. Where is the AI tools? Where are they pulling things from? One of the things that I've done is, if you have access to like a Turnitin or something on your campus, sometimes you can take your content that you want to use for students in a resource and submit it as an assignment into like a sandbox course and run it through something like Turnitin to see if there's any flags and things like that. You want to be aware of those potential issues. Remember, if you're going to take resources and share it, you want to appropriately attribute any things that are there. And we all know that those are potential issues when we use generative AI. But generally speaking, when you create something with AI, that's yours. I think it's always a good best practice to be transparent with your students and let them know that AI assisted in the creation of X, Y, and Z, whatever it might be. But you sort of own that, right? It's not, when you create it, it's what you get. Your output is unique to you and your prompts. It's not owned by ChatGPT or whatever other tool. So you're welcome to use that. But I think sometimes, we don't need to academically cite it when we use it necessarily when we're creating resources and material, but that transparency is important to our students. And then, so I want to get into sharing a little bit, but I want to be aware of time. So I want to pause here first, and just make sure that we have an opportunity for a little bit of question and conversation. And I'm always happy to continue this conversation beyond today as well. If you're watching the recording, or if you've got want to send an email or connect on this, I'm always happy to do that. But really, what we want to make sure we're always doing is just being empathetic through this approach. That's the thing that I want to make sure everybody's aware of. Can we start with that idea of the learners and needs analysis? Can we empathize with our students? Can we get that into our detailed prompts and make sure we're being very specific and detailed and aligning to what our students need, what our learning objectives are, and what those outcomes are, and continually revise, edit, evaluate those outputs to give our students exactly what they're looking for. And make sure you're always, again, being empathetic. If you were one of the students, if you were going through this, would you feel like this is designed for you? What would your takeaway be if you were a student in this class? And that's important to think about. Put yourself in their shoes, better understand what those shoes are like and what things look like from them. And it's important that we recognize that empathetic approach throughout the process. So with that, I'm going to open up for questions here, comments, concerns, anything that we want to talk about over these next couple of minutes. Please feel free either in the chat or to come off mute.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, I would encourage anyone to, if you would like to unmute yourself, feel free and join the conversation here. Some amazing pearls of wisdom. We were capturing some of those in the chat as we went along. I personally really appreciate how you have woven, empathy practices through that process of using AI and that partnership really with AI as a
Mhm.
design, like you said, not the autopilot, but the co-pilot.
Yeah.
So we'd be interested to hear, how are folks currently using AI in creating OER? What concerns do you have? That sort of thing.
I've got a question, a comment and a question. So a comment
Mhm.
and
Please.
inspiration that I have. Thank you, Dan, for this presentation. Is to empower my students to ask the chatbot to explain it, the course material
Hmm.
in a way that they understand. And I think that's a great empowering students is always a good thing in my mind. And if they get experience in my class prompt engineering, then that can will likely help them in other ways. But my question is, you mentioned using Turnitin to help check for plagiarized text within Gen AI outputs. That thing is really interesting, and I wonder, in your experience, has that surfaced things like because I know that the Gen AI can be pretty good at obscuring, rewriting in effect,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's always one of those like it's a catch 22, right? Because it's we know that the tools like Turnitin in not to single them out really, it's all these plagiarism checker detection type softwares. They're struggling with knowing whether or not things are necessarily from AI, right? And it's no surprise that this is a rapidly evolving thing. So like to use those to try to catch our students cheating, so to speak, can be difficult in and of itself. So do we, should we still do that? I think it's a piece of information. It's a data point. Can we use it ourselves to review the work? Is it foolproof? No, I don't think so. Is it another data point? Yes, I do think so. Is it something that we should rely on solely? No, probably not. Ultimately, you need to be responsible for it. But again, I think I do really feel like these AI tools are getting a little bit better at some of these initial concerns and some of the issues that were coming up. And I think it doesn't mean we should blindly trust the generative AI tools, but we're starting to learn more about what is and isn't technically plagiarism or copyright infringement and things like that. And recognizing that and understanding that is important. Sometimes, too, depending on what your content is, you're going to run into some of these issues a little bit more or less, right? If you're, um, teaching sort of introductory level things where it's very sort of established across the field, you're less likely to run into some of those plagiarism things. But if you're starting to work on, pulling from single sources and studies, it's gonna find that and it's gonna pull heavily from that. We want to make sure we're crediting that as well. So again, those are things that you can ask in the prompt to provide lists of resources or citations. Again, fair warning, right? We know those aren't always accurate when they come back from the generative AI tools as well. We've seen examples where the generative AI tools will just make sources up and citations up in the past. So these are all things that we still need to be aware of. It's, I think, as I said, a very evolving field and far from perfect still at this time. But those are ways that we can try to sort of get those data points to help us, I think. And to your point about students using AI, I just last week actually gave a presentation at a conference for K-12, and it was all about getting students to start using AI and how we can have them use the AI tools for their learning. I'm a huge proponent of that, altering our assessments where we're encouraging folks to use AI. It's one of those things that they're going to be using it whether we want them to or not in some capacity. Can we teach them those sort of appropriate uses, prompt engineering, put up some of those guardrails and I saw a quote. I wish I could remember exactly who it was from the other day, but it was kind of like there's two types of people. There's, that are with AI. There's people that are going to use AI to do all their work for them and never learn anything. And there's people that are going to use AI to learn everything. And I think we want our students and we want to fall into that second half of trying to learn everything using AI. We now have the opportunity to learn so much in so many unique ways with just a few strokes of the keyboard. Let's try to empower our learners in that way rather than, keeping them away from it or having them just go there and plug and play and copy and paste.
Thank you.
Mary Jo, your hand is up.
Hi, hi, Al. I Great presentation. Thank you very much. Um, I, One thing that I just wanted to pass this along. I'd never experienced it quite this way before. I'm taking one of the CPD courses. It's on data storytelling and data analysis, and I thought it would be pretty technical and dry and fact-based. The thing that actually kept me going. And I was really pretty scared of this because I haven't been doing this lately in a while, and it's a good brush up and refresher for me. Anyways, the point is I was really afraid of the feedback I'm going to get, and it's not going to be good enough, and so on and so forth. I was pleasantly surprised. I was overjoyed that the instructors' feedback, and I don't know if they were using AI, but God, they must have been, was so empathetic, was so encouraging, was so, and it wasn't like coaching from above. It was really partnership. We're partnering with you to do this, blah, blah, blah. They must have been coached to do it. I never felt so supported, what I'm saying,
Hmm.
in almost any course I did. So I would love to be able to do, if it wasn't assessment per se, but it was more just being able to give us a realistic, or not even just realistic, but just being very kind in the way you're presenting your
Yeah,
feedback.
absolutely. It's a great point. And you can certainly use that, right? You can use AI to develop, some example feedbacks. I use that sometimes to get like feedback starters. Like I know here's an assignment. I know there's a key takeaway I want all my students to have. Can I get that sort of generic starting point? And then of course I'm going to give very specific feedback to the student, but everybody's going to kind of get this one nugget that I want to make sure everybody's taken away. You can use AI to help develop those things and save some time and be more efficient.
Thank you. Are
And
there
this
other questions or comments?
throw
Okay.
my email up there and LinkedIn as well. If anybody wants to connect on this, I can put it in the chat also, just to make sure you've got it. Again, like I said, I'm always happy to continue the conversation. If there's anything I can ever do to help or to share, I'm always happy to do that. So please feel free to reach out at any time. And I appreciate your time for being here and for joining us today.
Thank you, Dan. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. I appreciate your presentation and your expertise and helping us to look at things a little bit differently with that empathic lens. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Tomorrow we will wrap up Open Ed Week with two sessions, one at 10 a.m. on creating an open access sustainability learning commons, and at 12 p.m. About faculty-driven innovation for gateway course success using an OER-based courseware. Both of those are Eastern Standard Time, and the link to register can be found at the SUNY Online Open Ed Week website. In the chat. Recordings are going to be posted on our YouTube channel. There's a link for you for that. And SUNY Open Ed Week is featured on Open Ed Global. We encourage you to check out events from around the globe this week at that website. Thank you all for attending today. We appreciate you.
Thank you.